Hey y'all, it's Amy, and on today's vlog post from Bisque Imports, we're going to be talking all about silkscreens. I'm going to show you how to use them, how to care for them, and most importantly, how to incorporate them into your studio to create your very own coloring book bisque. Let's get started. If you're new to silkscreens, this is what they look like. They come from Bisque Imports packaged in this great little plastic bag to keep them nice and clean and flat. That's really important when it comes to screens. And when these screens are printed, they're printed on this screen material that as they're printed, it kind of etches away where the design is. And though it looks to be just white or like see-through, it's actually a screen, so it's almost like mesh. And when you use a material like glaze or paint and you scrape that material on top of the screen, it will bleed through that mesh in a really beautiful, crisp way so that when you peel the screen away, you've got this really clean design. When cared for, screens can last a very, very long time. So you can keep these in your studio for like collections or for your customers to use them, or like I mentioned, to make your very own coloring book bisque. I think there are two schools of thought when it comes to silkscreen. You know, because it is an item that you're investing in for your business, it can feel very scary to cut them down. But I will say they are a lot easier to manage when you have cut them from the screen. So that's what I'm gonna do first. I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm just gonna trim out each design so that I have them separated so I can, place them around my piece of pottery as I wish. Obviously, you must be very careful when you're doing this because if you cut too close to the design, you could ruin it. So no pressure, just take your time. That was stressful. Tried to play it cool, but that was stressful. All right, the next materials that you are going to need are some glaze. This is my preferred Tuxedo by Mako. It's a super black, really rich color, and the consistency is really great. Next, you're going to obviously need your silkscreen medium. This is a product from Mako. It is so good. A little bit goes a really long way. This jar can last through many screens. A squeegee from Bisque Imports. These are so helpful. It's one of those things that you may look at and think like, I don't really need that. But you do. It applies the mixture so evenly and you really avoid putting on too much, which is a problem when it comes to screening. Obviously, you need your screens. And lastly, your piece of bisque. So you want to look at your pieces and you want to start planning out your design. So I feel really drawn to this drink in my hand, toes in the sand situation. So I want to plan around this design. And the great thing about silk screens versus like a stencil or something like that is that it will bend with your piece, where a flat plastic stencil would have a really hard time wrapping around this piece. And then I've got all these little illustrations that I can go around the piece. And another thing I'm gonna grab is some washi tape. That is just gonna help me kind of keep the silk screen in one space without having to like worry about it moving around too much. Put that to the side. And now it's time to talk about mixing our medium. A decent amount of glaze. And next we are going to uncap our silkscreen medium and we're gonna sprinkle a little bit into our mixture. A little bit goes a long way. You want to mix the mixture together. You want to combine the mixture until it looks like the consistency of a creamy peanut butter. Some people say toothpaste. It is sort of a feeling. You don't want it to be so dry that it feels almost like wet sand. It needs to be movable, but it doesn't need to be so thin that it kind of looks the same as if you just poured it from the bottle, because it needs a little bit of that grit to pass through the screen and be nice and clean and crisp. I'm gonna start with just a pinch. I'm gonna sprinkle it evenly on top of the glaze, and I'm just gonna use this to mix in the powder with the glaze. So I need a little bit more. It's still just a little too loose for me. I'm gonna sprinkle about the same amount. I'm gonna find my washi tape and I'm gonna tape down my silkscreen. Washi tape is great because it's paper tape. And just like painter's tape, it does not leave a ton of residue behind because it's kind of meant to be picked up and moved around and all that good stuff. gonna take my silk screen and press it on top of my piece. It will still kind of wrinkle just a little bit because we are dealing with, you know, a concave piece like this. So I'm just gonna make sure that I've got a good grasp on it and that I can kind of, you know, manipulate the screen just a little bit. And I'm picking up some glaze on my squeegee. I'm gonna really carefully swipe down my screen. The trick is make sure that you have everything screened before you pull the screen away, because it is really hard to kind of match it up and try to do it again. So having the tape on there is really nice because I can pick it up and see if I missed any spots. There we go, we're gonna pull it up just like that, and it is ready to be cleaned. And I'm finding that the mixture is just a little bit too thin still, and I know that because it didn't really get those tight thin places like I wanted it to. It's not quite as mixture, it's just adding a little bit more of the silkscreen medium to it. I do think that when kind of the shine of the glaze is gone, that is when you can screen your heart out. So I've got it remixed again. Remix. Once you wash your screens, you want to make sure that you're letting them dry flat between paper towels. It's really important that you let them dry flat because if they get kind of wrinkled and crumpled, they will dry in that state and become really hard to use because they won't lie flat. So like I mentioned earlier, there are ways to clean up the spaces where you have accidentally got some of that paint mixture outside of the screen, like, you know, where you don't want to see it, like right there. And I do that by just taking a pencil and making sure that the eraser is super clean. I take it, and honestly, once the paint is dry, I just use this eraser to sort of like buff it off the bisque. You're almost like sanding it away. And speaking of, if you have a fine grit sandpaper, that also does a really good job of getting rid of these, any mistakes that you make. And I'm doing that until I remove all those extra little bits that I don't want to see. So from here, we could start, you know, filling in a background, painting these seashells, adding all of these little extra decorations. But because this is, you know, just glaze that has dried slightly, the second you put, you know, new fresh glaze on top of it, the moisture in that glaze is going to reactivate the outline essentially, and it could turn into a bit of a smudgy mess. So to turn this into coloring book bisque, all you have to do is sit this in the kiln as is, no stilts, and fire it, and that will kind of tattoo these images onto the picture. You can paint on top of them without any consequences. So check back tomorrow, and I'm gonna have this nice and fired, and we'll start adding color in it, and you'll see exactly what it looks like. Our picture is fresh out of the kiln, and these silkscreen designs are fired on, so that means they're not going anywhere. I could take a paintbrush with water and paint over them, and it's not affecting it at all. So when it comes time to start filling in our designs, there's a few different ways that you can do it. Obviously, you could treat this like a genuine coloring book, and you could really carefully start filling in. Really carefully, you can start kind of painting in the lines here, like a traditional coloring book or a paint by numbers almost. And that's super easy and simple, and it gives your customers kind of like a zen moment. But another really simple way to add color is by doing a color wash. And this is really great for coloring book bisque because you're putting on such a thin coat of glaze that you'll still be able to see the black details through it. So I'm taking a clean brush and I'm dipping it into clean water, and I'm just thinning down the stroking coat to be like a wash consistency, almost like watercolor. And then I'm just gonna come in and fill in this whole design. You can even combine these techniques, and after you've done a wash, you can come in and fill in these smaller details, and that will give you a cool effect of it being really kind of transparent where the wash is, where that watercolor effect is, and then being nice and rich and pigmented where you're putting these dots. If your customer prefers a more crisp outline, there's a couple ways that you can bring back that richness of the black that's been covered up with a little bit of paint. One way is to give your customers Q-tips at the tip of the Q-tips and kind of slide it over the black areas that have paint on it that they want to remove. And again, because this has been fired on, it's not going to go anywhere. And another way to do that is to, give them black paint and allow them to re-outline the design. Each customer is going to be different, and giving them something like this is really an act of empowerment. You're showing them all the different ways they can be the artist that they want to be in your studio, and by giving them that knowledge and that freedom, that's just going to keep them coming back to kind of hone their skills, and they're likely to tell all their friends about it too. You don't have to give them a paintbrush for this. You could always give them a squeeze bottle if that's what you prefer to hand out in your studio. Both work great. Washes work great on backgrounds as well, and I'm doing the same thing that I was doing to fill in our designs. I'm just taking a fan brush this time and dipping it into some water, thinning out the glaze, and I'm just coming around each design and painting over it. Again, I'm not so worried if this covers up my lettering just a little bit. I can either come back in with a wet Q-tip and wipe it off to make it like nice and bold, or I can take my liner brush or my squeeze bottle and paint that back in, almost like using it as a stencil. And that's it. Silkscreens are a great tool for your studio, either by sharing them with your customers in a class or doing your very own coloring book bisque. Could bust out so many of these, and you could make like one of a kind collections for your studio. Bisque Imports offers so many different types of silk screens designed by their amazing in-house artists or people like me, Crafty Chica, Brushstrokes Pottery. There are so many different designs. There is a silk screen for every single occasion. You'll be amazed. So tell us, how do you plan on using silk screens in your studio? Are you gonna use it for summer camp? Are you gonna do like walk-in basis? Are you gonna offer special classes for them? Or are you gonna make your very own coloring book bisque? We cannot wait to hear about it, and until then, we'll see you next time.